they'll ask me, what's one piece of advice you could give us as we enter the workforce and all that kind of stuff. And don't take a job for the money. Make your primary reason to take a job for some aspect of mentorship. If it's a clinical mentor for clinical dentistry, or a business mentor for accelerating your career early on and teaching you bigger things that are bigger than just yourself, I think that's completely invaluable.
Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome to episode number 40 of the Go Live with Joshua Scott. I am happy to be here on a Friday with my good friends, Perrin, DesPortes with Polaris Dental Partners. Dude, what's up, man? How are you?
It's I don't lack for hours, ways to fill the hours in the day, but this is one that I've been looking forward to for a while since we've been talking about it. I think you and I share a lot of similar outlooks on the aspects of the industry, at least that we serve. So super thrilled to be with you, and I'm more than confident we'll be able to fill the time today. I hope it's valuable for your audience.
Well, I know. I had to stop us because we were getting down a road, and I'm like, hold on, we need to actually create an episode here. Sometimes I find that it's like I get friends on and we start talking, and I'm like, hold on, wait, we actually had a purpose here. So let's pause for a second. But
Right.
man, I've had a ton of fun getting to know you, especially over the past probably 6 months. I think you reached out to me earlier in the year and just said, hey, I would love to talk, and so we did that. But then even seeing you at DSS this last June, meeting you in person. Your presentation there was, I try to sit in on at least a half a dozen of the ones that really kind of piqued my interest, but man, yours was fire. Like, you did a great job. It's probably one of my favorites from the event. So let's back up and just kind of start with like how you got into dentistry, man. I don't think I even know that backstory.
Yeah, I'll try to make it brief. So all joking aside, you could almost say that I was born into the industry. My family owned a dental distribution business, of all things, headquartered in Columbia, South Carolina. It was called Thompson Dental Company, and I was fourth generation in that business. So my great grandfather, James Perrin Thompson, founded the business back in 1899, and it moved it from Charleston, South Carolina, on the coast, to Columbia. And when I entered the business in 1995. My father was president and CEO. My grandfather was chairman of the board, and it was, a family-held business, but a fast-growing business. I give my father a lot of credit for that. He was a very innovative business person, and really one of the sharpest minds I've ever been around. I try to say that with all the humility that I possibly can. But dental distribution back in those days, in the mid 90s, was a really traditional business, and high fixed costs. But our business was growing at double digits. We had about 13 or 14 sales offices from Baltimore down through Orlando, if I remember correctly. About 400 employees on the run rate of about 100 million in revenue.
Wow.
And the business was operationally sound, and growing tremendously. My dad implemented a practice management computer software application within the company, like grew it, bootstrapped it, and we did hardware and software integration, digital cameras and digital X-ray integration. Back when all that stuff was, running on Windows 95, if you remember back those days. Kind of scary to think about it, but in any event, the short version of that business was that my father has two sisters, neither of whom worked in the business, nor did their husbands or any of their kids. My grandfather at the time was, I think, like 84 or mid 80s, something like that. Was in decent health, but not great health. And my grandmother had passed away already. And upon my grandfather's ultimate demise, whenever that would be, his estate was set up to be share and share alike. So I wasn't a math major in undergrad, but I can kind of figure this thing out, that if you have a large business that has some intrinsic value to it, it's taxable value. And if you have an estate that's going to be a third, a third, and a third, and 2/3 of those new owners don't work in the business, don't want to work in the business, don't have any connections to the business, it's probably going to create a lot of hardship for the person who does own a third, who's spent their entire career. And so, you know, we were looking for venture capital opportunities, but after the dot-com burst in September 11th, there was nobody that wanted to invest in a family-held business like that.
Yeah.
So there were only two options, and that was Shine and Patterson. And Southeastern values work really well with Minnesota nice, as I like to say. And we knew the Patterson people really well, knew the Shine people really well too. Great, both are great group of folks, but from a cultural fit, it was arguably better with Patterson, and the geographic fit was completely complementary to those two businesses. And it ended up being a very successful transition for both companies and the vast, vast majority of the employees. So that got me out of a family-held business and into corporate America. And I spent 15 years running 3 different businesses for Patterson. I always wish I had had more than the 7 years that I did working with my dad. I mean, you can't
Yeah.
replace that kind of connection. But at the same time, I learned a tremendous amount from my time at Patterson. They gave me a lot of responsibility at a very early age. I was a general manager at 31, if I remember correctly. So I had full
Wow.
P&L responsibility, was the youngest person in the branch, running a branch of about 45 people that did 28 million in sales or something like that. And you just don't get those opportunities until you get those opportunities. And I did pretty well with it, was able to parlay a pretty decent career through the years, and my branch has won some awards and everything, and had a great experience. But in my mid 40s, after having spent 15 years of doing that, I was newly married at the time, had a young daughter. My wife's an ophthalmologist, and I didn't want to live on an airplane, so I didn't want to take the next step as like a regional manager.
Yeah.
And for a boy who grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, I'm not built for Minnesota winters. So, a trip to the corporate office in the ivory tower wasn't in it for me. So I started looking around, trying to figure out what I wanted to do for the next half of my career, next phase of my career, and ended up launching with a couple of industry colleagues who I knew, ended up launching a startup called Tusk Partners, excuse me, in January of 2017. And my current partner, DeWalker Sinha, and I were 2 of the 3 operating partners in that business. We left Tusk March of 2021 to launch Polaris Healthcare Partners. And Polaris Healthcare Partners is a strategic consulting and M&A advisory firm that focuses exclusively with group dental practices. So we help entrepreneurial dentists build and exit successful group practices. And we can dive into all the specifics around
Yeah.
that and everything more deeply if you want. But that's about as much as I can condense the history, if you will.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I didn't know that. I think about, gosh, how valuable that would have been to grow up in a family of entrepreneurs, and running a business of that size probably just became so much that became innate in you. Patterson probably saw it and was like, "Hey, come over here. You're valuable."
They were really good to me, I'll say. And I mean, you do learn a lot of things at the dinner table and having candid conversations with your dad about
Yeah.
the challenges of building a business and growing a business and setbacks and all that kind of stuff. And I wouldn't say that he force fed it to us, but my brother and I could ask any question at any time and he'd answer it pretty honestly, for better or for
Yeah.
worse, and it changes your mindset around business. It changes your mindset around leadership. And it also, for what people think family held businesses are and the privilege that you have growing up in one, there is some of that for sure. But I would
Yeah.
also tell you that there are a lot of obligations and things that go on behind the scenes that people aren't privy to that would make your head spin if you saw how the sausage was made. So,
Yeah.
um,
I was going to ask, like, I'm sure there was parts of that were amazing. Did growing up like that, was it such a good experience to where you were like, yes, of course I want to do business? Or was it the other way to where you're like, never in my life, I want to get as far away from this as possible?
I think I was somebody who gravitated to it.
Yeah.
Um, I'm a lifelong learner. I like learning. I like education. I like to read. I like to learn from other people's experiences. And what I would say is that, you know, I I think I always had kind of you know, uh, an inclination towards business.
Yeah.
And one of the neat things about being a family member is that not only could I talk with my dad about things, but I could also talk with um, at the time our CFO or our COO or people like that, and kind of get some insights into things at a younger stage of my career, and I
Yeah.
think that matters a lot. And when people ask me, I sometimes speak to dental students and things, and they'll ask me, what's one piece of advice you could give us as we enter the workforce and all that kind of stuff. And same whether it's dentists entering their profession or anybody else, I would say, that if you're motivated and you master your craft, you will make a lot of money.
Mhm.
Right. So, I mean, the money will be there. And I know that's easier said than done. We all have bills to pay, but don't take a job for the money. Make your primary reason to take a job for some aspect of mentorship.
Yeah.
And I was the beneficiary of that early on, and I don't know that I really appreciated it at the time. But if it's a clinical mentor for clinical dentistry or a business mentor for accelerating your career early on and teaching you bigger things that are bigger than just yourself, I think that's completely invaluable.
Yeah.
And I fully appreciate it now.
Yeah. Gosh, that's such good advice. I know. So you go on to start Polaris Healthcare Partners, which I think I opened up and said Polaris Dental Partners, which I know that. And I know it's healthcare. So I apologize. It's Polaris Healthcare Partners. But tell me what you guys were trying to do with that. Like, what was the need? What did you see that said, we need to go do this?
Yeah. So it's a good question, and it wasn't I'll say it wasn't obvious. I mean, the company we founded before Polaris essentially did the same thing that we're doing now. But the journey was that, if you go back and you think about the economic crisis that was brought about by the housing collapse, '08, '09, '10. I lived in Manhattan at the time, and those weren't great times to see Lehman and a number of businesses, Bear Stearns, go under and everything like that. And it had a significant impact in the New York City economy. Obviously, it had a huge impact across the United States.
Yeah.
But coming out of that, you really saw the proliferation of a lot of these group practices. And dentistry had historically been, typically one dentist in one location with 6 or 8 staff, and that was that. And maybe an orthodontist had 2 locations or something like that. But you had Heartland Dental and all the bigger enterprise level groups, and then you had a bunch of solo dentists, and that was the industry. And all of a sudden, you started seeing a lot of these dentists that wanted to own, that were typically like in the first half of their career, and they wanted to own more than one location.
Yeah.
And um, from the distribution side, these were our best customers. They were the most successful, right? They built a really successful initial practice, and they bought or built a second one, and then that might have gone all right, but maybe not as well as what they had planned. So they bought a third one, and all of a sudden they started getting into a lot of challenges that were leadership oriented, somewhat
Yeah.
operational, somewhat valuation. They might have overpaid for the practices they bought and things like that, and suffering under the debt burden and everything. And I saw this from the distribution side, because for as many solo practices as there are that are well run, and financially profitable and all that, there are a lot of dental practice management consultants that focus in the solo practice space, but there was nobody really focusing in the group practice space. And what dental practice management consultants do in terms of systems and processes and scheduling efficiencies and hygiene retention and case acceptance and all that, that's all mission critical at a practice level. But
Yeah.
that's not what builds ultimately a successful group practice. And so for as many practice management consultants as there were no like strategic and consultants giving advice on how to scale a business, like true C-suite consulting, and that's because most of this true C-suite consulting, like Accenture and all these other enterprise level, McKinsey and these consulting companies, are the price tags are it's cost prohibitive, right, to work with a 3 location group practice. So I saw that, and DeWalker, my partner, was a healthcare banker, and he loaned a lot of money in the group practice space. East West Bank, his last bank venture, where he was VP of sales, they were the preeminent lender in the group practice space. And he saw how businesses like Pacific Dental Services at the top end of the food chain, he saw how they used debt to grow their business and do it very effectively. And he also saw Dr. John Smith, who was struggling to make payments on a monthly basis at 3 locations. So
Yeah.
his perspective was different from mine, but the outcome was kind of the same. And so we started saying, like, this looks like a really fast growing, fast moving segment of the space, but there's not anybody really giving guidance. And then lo and behold, we also figured out that if there were an entrepreneur that created some level of success in a group practice and he or she wanted to take some chips off the table, or they wanted to sell the business and walk away outright, the complexity of those transactions with a private equity type buyer were far beyond what a traditional dental practice broker could cover. And it's the structure is more important than the price almost in those circumstances. So we decided to launch a business that would focus exclusively in group dental practices, and even more exclusively in what we call doctor founded and debt funded groups. So it's entrepreneurial dentists who are scaling themselves out of the chair, and they're using bank funds to grow their empire. And that is our target market. And everything we do is oriented at those entrepreneurs. And the last thing I'll say, the earlier part of your point about Polaris Dental Partners versus Polaris Healthcare Partners. I mentioned earlier, my wife's an ophthalmologist, and some of the consolidation of dentistry is not unique to dentistry. We really think that there are other healthcare verticals like ophthalmology or optometry or somewhat podiatry or, some behavioral health and some things like that might look and feel a lot like dentistry. The veterinary, for example, is an obvious one. The metrics are a little bit different, but the application is really the same. So we think if we can build a successful business in dentistry, then we can possibly wash, rinse, repeat in some other healthcare verticals as well.
Yeah. Gosh, my brother-in-law is an orthopedic surgeon, and I've watched some of that happen here in Columbus over the last 20 years. I mean, honestly, it's pretty well consolidated at this point. It's just big groups, but 10 years ago, that decade before, it was happening, and watching him come out of school and going to work for a small group. I think at the time was 3, and now it's 17 partners. And, and I'm like, bro, so every time we get together, I'm like, dude, tell me about all this. How does 17 partners, how does that arrangement work, and splitting tech costs and all the things. So we look at that. It's been a fascinating conversation for me because it feels like a little bit of a map for the next decade, in dentistry. At least some points of it I think would be helpful.
Absolutely.
But what do you, so I was going to ask you about your ideal kind of client and what the people you kind of help the best. Is it within a certain practice range? I know you mentioned entrepreneurial mindset. Is it a certain number of practices? Like, where are they at in the process?
Yeah, I mean, so do we have an ideal client? We certainly do. We don't really put a boundary around it in terms of number of locations or revenue or EBITDA or anything like that. It's really some other maybe more subjective criteria. So the first things first is we don't work with solo dentists that want to stay solo dentists or solo practices. And there's still a lot of them, and they run great businesses, but that's just not where we fit. And we don't work with private equity backed groups either, because they don't need our services. They already know what we know, and the proof is in the pudding for them. So what does our ideal client look like? Our ideal client could be a dentist business owner in a solo practice that desires to have more than one location. And understandably, they don't know what they don't know. They know a lot about clinical dentistry. They know a lot about running their operation. They've built some level of success, but what is it like to add additional locations? How quickly should I grow them? Is there an end game? Like, build it to X number of dollars of value and exit? Or is this build to operate? Is it going to be, one business owner owning the whole thing? Are you going to bring in minority partners? there's, do you want to get to some level where you centralize administrative services? Or are you going to stop before that? There are a million points of, like, I call it decision tree analysis, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you got to be pretty intentional about all that. So we do have a lot of people that come to us that are one location, that they know somebody who built a group and they think they want to do it too, but they're not 100% sure. And we have an educational offering called a discovery day that's one-on-one with the client. I teach probably 95% of them right now. But it's a 7-hour day where I teach a bunch of fundamentals of group practices. But the idea is that I'm one-on-one with the client. They can ask, there are no stupid questions. They can ask anything they want. We can go down any rabbit hole for as long as they want. And it's just an unencumbered type of a day together. And I'll tell you something honestly, probably about a quarter of the people that come and spend a day with me elect to go home and focus and stay focused on their solo practice and not build a group.
Yeah.
We do not believe that this is for everybody, and that, hey, the water's warm, come on in, it's easy, everybody's doing it, you should do it too. I mean, it's a stupid way to build a business, but arguably my first order of business is to talk you out of doing this. And if I can't talk you out of it and you really are convicted about wanting to build a group, then let's roll up our sleeves and figure that out.
Yeah.
So if we get to people in a solo practice like that, a discovery day is a great day for them. And I love teaching them, honestly. But our ideal client is probably somebody that's at, call it 2 or 3 locations ish,
Yeah.
and they have desires to get to be some level bigger. That may be 5 locations. It may be 15 locations. And they're looking for somebody to guide them, honestly. And as consultants, the difference in coaching and consulting is really that a consultant is going to tell you what to do and drive you to do it, and hopefully tell
Mhm.
you what not to do, and you probably ought to listen to them.
Yeah.
So when people pay us as consultants, we give them guidance, we accelerate their learning curve. Trial and error is a tough way to build a business, man. I mean,
Yeah.
you can relate to that. I know we can too, but sometimes those mistakes are really costly in terms of time and money. And if we can avoid stepping on those landmines for a client, it'll save them a lot of time, a lot of heartache, and a lot of headache over that period. So I would say, people come to us in the 2 to 3 to 5 location to start typically, and then our consulting engagements typically last about 12 to 18 months. We tend to work ourselves out of a job, or at least we try to.
Yeah.
And they may exit with us at 5 to 10 locations, or we may stay on for 10 to 20 locations. But I think our services beyond consulting are debt recapitalization, because, like I say, everybody's using bank funds to grow, and there's a right way and a wrong way to do that. We do associate equity models, which you saw a little bit of in the
Okay.
at Mark Costas's Dental Success Summit in Phoenix, and there are a couple of different methodologies for that are different than traditional buy-ins. And I think now one of the recent phenomenons that we're seeing too is business mergers. So
Mm.
what does it look like if you have a 10 location general dentistry group that wants to go into the next city, and there's a 5 location general dentistry group? Like, how do you put those two things together?
Yeah.
Or how do you take a pedo group and an ortho group and fuse those two things together?
Yeah.
What is that like? And so we're starting to see more of that, and that's become a significant service offering of ours over, I'd say, the last probably 12 to 18 months or so.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the questions I've learned to ask when I'm on the phone with group practices, and just even from a marketing perspective, like they're calling me about marketing and how to, position themselves, is I've always asked that, like, hey, like, what's the end game here? And a lot of times they're surprised by it. They're like, oh, that question's interesting in this context. And I'm like, well, look, I mean, I need to know, what are we doing here? Are we, is this, 8 practices in the next 4 years? Is this like a capitalization event next year? Like where are we at? Because that for my team is important to know: aggressiveness, goals. Because we've had some big groups come to us and just say, our brand kind of sucks, and we're going to go through a capitalization event next year. And we know if we really can bring this up, it's probably going to add like hundreds of thousands, if not maybe even a couple million to the offer, you know, because it's just the presentation of it. So we've had
Yeah.
that versus I need 5 practices next year and we got to go and we need quick turnaround systems. So I think it's such an important question in that. You guys have been what I've really loved about you, and I think it's just kind of mutual values is the educational marketing approach. I mean, you guys have been, it's like you're putting it out there, man. You're pouring yourselves out. It's like any education you got, you're like, here. It's between the podcast, speaking. When you were at Mark's event, you hit a subject that I think is really, really valuable that I want to kind of ask some questions around, because the concept of recruiting associates and retaining associates and all that's involved. I think you can disagree with this if you want. I think it's probably one of the top 5 issues right now in the profession. It seems like kind of post-COVID, like this whole recruiting, onboarding, retaining associates has just been like top level. But I know also you've got some statistics about it. Just the amount of associates coming online in the next 2 to 3 years is just only going to ramp up. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I don't know. I wouldn't disagree with you unless I were to disagree around the margins, which is to say that in our opinion, or at least in the group practice space, attracting, motivating, and retaining associates is the number one problem. It's top 5 is being generous,
Okay.
you know. So and so I think there's a lot to unpack there, right? I mean, so if you think about a group practice, anytime you have provider turnover, it's bad for continuity of patient care and ultimately patient retention. It creates holes in productive capacity, and that is incredibly problematic for financial performance. And it's just a massive headache, you know? And these are your key people that substantiate, perpetuate the clinical direction of the business. And I think one of the challenges is a little bit of historical mindset. And it used to be that just, you know, coming out of dental school, like maybe historically dentists were better prepared than they are now. I don't know about that. I mean, that's above my pay grade, you know, and I'm not one to judge clinical competence or anything like that. But maybe the complexity of the procedures that at least general dentists do was less historically than it is now. I mean, they're general dentists, especially, doing a lot more complicated work these days. But, you know, I felt like associates were more kind of plug and play, you know, and they also didn't have that wanderlust. You know, if you rarely heard of associates turning over, at least in the traditional solo practice space. Well, now it's a scenario where if you're a business, if you're trying to build a group and you're the owner or one of the owners, you've got to think about associates holistically. It's not a matter of, oh, one left, we had to terminate one, or one left, I got to go find another one. Recruiting is a 24/7 game now. And I learned this at Patterson. If you turn off the marketing engine, the recruiting engine, restarting that thing is timely and costly and just not effective. So if you're going to build a group, you should always be recruiting. Well, what does that mean? Well, recruiting means you got to be promoting your business. Okay, well, why would an associate want to join your group versus any other group? You know, what's different about you? I mean, it's not clinical compensation rate, okay? I mean, everybody gets hung up around, well, Josh, you pay 32% and we pay 35%. And, you know, what the heck does that mean? You know, you can't spend a percentage, you can spend dollars. So I always tell people, if you think the differentiator in your business is that you pay a higher clinical compensation rate, of what? So if the average associate if you pay 35%, or let's say you pay 30%, and the average associate in your business is collecting $500,000, that's 150 grand in income. I may only pay 25%. But if the average associate in my business collects $1 million, that's 250 grand. What would you rather have? You know, so it's like, get off the compensation rate, get onto what income means, and healthcare and medical malpractice and continuing education benefits, the overall benefit structure of the business. Core
Yeah.
values mean a hell of a lot. And
Yeah.
if you don't take them seriously, don't expect your associates to. But
Well, and one of
younger,
your points, yeah, and one of your points, which I loved, was it was almost you talk about like creating like the deck, like the presentation
yeah,
to pitch to the associate, and a lot of it was like for me, it was instantly like it's the story, like what is the story here? Marketing world, man, like I was eating that up because I think it's so true. One of the trends, even I think post COVID, is we started working with some of these groups, not at their practice level, but at the management company level or the DSO
right,
level, because when recruiting all of a sudden became like, oh crap, this is a problem, the ones that had invested in the story, in the brands, in the values at a higher level immediately have an advantage. And I would even say like that when you're talking compensation with a potential associate coming on, yeah, we got to get apples to apples, but you may not have to meet the other offer 100%, because if it's a group, if it's some like corporate group versus you, and you've got a compelling story, I think they're choosing you every day.
I, I agree completely. And the reason that we built that recruiting deck that was part of that presentation, and the recruiting deck is part of the associate equity model service that we offer. But like if you're going to build a group, you're going to recruit a lot of associates over a long period of time, and
Yeah.
you need to understand that you are competing against enterprise level groups with deeper pockets than you.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, the recruiter does this for a living. They're professionally trained. It's part of the HR department. They're the
Yeah.
smoothest salespeople on the face of the planet. Their job is to close,
Yeah.
hire the associate, get them to say yes. And they tell the story of ABC DSO, right?
Right.
Insert any brand name we all know and love. They tell the story through a structured presentation, and it's a printed copy that the prospective associate takes with them, can flip through in their living room with a cup of coffee or a glass of scotch, refer back to. It's top of mind. You
Yeah.
can't show up to recruit associates from dental school or anywhere else and be like, hey, you need a job?
Right.
That it's not good enough, man. I mean, if you're going to build a group, you've got to compete. You got to compete with professionals, and you got to look like a professional doing it. And the deck is the entry point to that. It's something that gets the associate over the threshold, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
it's up to you, your onboarding program. What's the first 90 days look like? What does the clinical mentorship and development 2 to 3 year track look like? How do I become a partner?
Right.
I want to be an owner. I don't want to go through 4 failed associateships, till I find the right one.
Yeah. And I think, gosh, probably from my just outside experience looking at it, that it's so valuable because you're talking about thinking about this, not just, okay, you got one associate to hire. Like I get that, but think about this as like building a system that competes with the other guys. Before we got live, we were talking about the problems of business owners, what we're trying to solve, and how we both were like, we'll touch a problem, we'll solve it, but man, I got to solve that for the next 3 to 5 years, because
Yeah.
that's the only way if I put energy into something, it can't come back 6 months later. And I think a lot of what you're saying is, I know you got one or two associates you're recruiting, but like think about this as a system that can compete at those levels.
It absolutely is. And I mean, I'm a systems guy as well. I'm process driven, and the way I think about things, I have to figure out what the finish line is and then connect the dots back to where I am. And then I understand what I'm doing. And, if the idea is, we lost an associate, I need an associate, let's just plug a hole, tell me where you're going to be in 120 days, probably back to the same scenario. But if you have a system, a process that is, recruiting, that's promotion, right? That's the deck we were talking about. Then you have, when you close the deal and they sign on to want to be an associate with you, what's their first 90 days on the job look like? I mean, it wasn't that long ago that I was entering Patterson and a couple of different branches that I ran, but even at the same company, the first couple of weeks on the new job are a little anxiety riddled. You
Yeah.
know, you got to acknowledge that when somebody's entering their first real tour of duty with you, that this is new for them. You need to take them through and reinforce everything you talked about in the recruiting process. And then everybody wants to play for a winner. You know,
Yeah.
nobody wants to play for a loser. Tell me, if
Right.
I come to work for you, how are you going to make me a better dentist? And that's
Yeah.
when you lay out the development plan in front of them. And then, oh, by the way, our marketing engine is great. And we generate a lot of new patients. You're going to get the opportunity to do a lot of dentistry. So if you master more complicated stuff, you're going to be able to apply it, and you have the opportunity to become a partner, an equity partner in the business, and sit at the table with us about the direction of the business. Those
Yeah.
people don't leave, you know?
Yeah. And one of the things you did a podcast on this as well. And I want to say it was a 2-part podcast. I was actually listening to it a little bit last week and again this week, just to kind of prep and have this fresh. I've actually sent it to clients. I think it's a brilliant podcast. So people should go back. It's probably a couple months back in the feed. But one of the things, you actually had a lot of really good one-liners in there. But one of them that I thought was brilliant. Your brilliant one-liners.
No.
You're like, no, keep.
Yeah.
um, you said the best recruiters understand their audience. And you were specifically talking about recognizing that most associates are coming to you with a high level of anxiety. Talk about that.
Yeah. So, and I was probably talking about that as like initially, especially those leaving residency or school,
Right.
and coming into a new business. This is or a new practice, a new group. Um, this is their first um, real at bat. I mean, this is where it gets serious, and everybody has a little bit of anxiety about, you know, can I do it? I mean, I had that at Patterson. I'm leaving the confines of the nest, where I could talk to my dad if I ever needed it. And now I'm working for corporate America. I've never run a branch before. Oh God, what do I do? Am I going to make it up as I go along? Who's kind of guiding me through the process? Just, let me get comfortable in my surroundings. And I
Yeah.
think that's what the onboarding piece is. It's a point to reinforce your core values. It's a point to reinforce the validity of the clinical team. All the
Yeah.
the the people around that young associate, they're going to make him or her successful. They got to do the dentistry, but the support team is there and they function at a super high level because they're pros.
Yeah.
I mean, so you want to kind of give them confidence that not only did they make the right choice in choosing your group, but that you're going to do everything you possibly can to make them successful, including putting the best people with them. And I
Yeah.
think that gets them to a level of confidence, or just sort of like the boat leveling out, literally, like they feel like they have their sea legs underneath them. And then maybe the other thing I talked about in that podcast, which I've talked about before, is the clinical development plan. And the becoming a master at your craft thing is incredibly important. And you also think about young dentists entering the workforce. They're not that far out of school. They're not that far out of the structure that is an academic curriculum that goes by semesters or trimesters, right? So they're
Yeah.
used to asking the question, when's the final exam? When's the term paper due, right?
Right.
So all of us in school look to the end, like, okay, what do we got between today, first day of class, and final exam? And if you lay out a clinical development curriculum, and you talk about, whatever skill it is that you want them to master, are you going to do it in-house with them? Are you going to send them somewhere for CE? Are you going to make a dollar investment, or are they going to have to make some and you make some? That kind of thing. It's like, oh, wait, I'm going to get a lot of at bats because this is a growing group and they generate a lot of new patients and a lot of patient flow here. That's cool. And I'm going
Yeah.
to get to learn under some of the best. And you mean this company's going to this group is going to make an investment in me on this? You know,
Yeah.
those are things that's just like the right people will eat that up. And
Yeah.
and I think that's what you're trying to solve for when it comes to uncertainty about somebody coming into your group.
Yeah. And even, I mean, and even back it up to like even the recruiting process and them showing up to you with either misrun, like poorly run groups that they're coming out of, failed associateships that they're leaving, the anxiety of their student debt and how's that getting paid for, and can it get paid for, and all that. And I think a lot of times if you're sitting there in an interview, you get detached from that and go, well, that's not my stuff. Like, it's professional. We're going to move on. But if you can empathetically connect with them on some of that stuff, and they realize you're not another group that's just going to spit me up and or whatever, chew me up and spit me out. I got it backwards. But you really actually care about who I am as a person. I think that's an edge in just the recruiting process.
Completely. And I mean, it kind of comes back to something we talk about at Polaris, which is, defining success. Like, how do you define success for a new employee? And this would be the same in your business. You hire somebody who's a graphic designer or, videographer or something like that. And yeah, I mean, they fulfill a function for you. I mean, they fill that role. But what does success look like from your lens as the business owner that you want them to understand? And
Yeah.
how, at the same time, I always tell new employees, like, by the way, these are the things that drive me crazy. Like, here are 3 or 4 things that if you really want to get under my skin and solidify the fact that we're going to have a terrible working relationship, do
Yeah.
these 4 things repeatedly. And one of us isn't going to be here in a little while. And guess
Right.
what? I'm staying. So I mean, it's stuff like that that's kind of fundamental, but you need to slow down and kind of think about it from their lens too.
Yeah. I'll ask you one more question on this, just because I think it's I think in the podcast I actually laughed out loud about it. But it was the importance around clarity around compensation. And I laugh because I know how this goes, but yet that just seems so obvious, but it doesn't really happen to the extent that it should.
Right. I mean, and it goes back to that, percentage of collections thing, and because those are the easy things to fall back on.
Yeah.
We pay 30%, you pay 25% or something like that. It's like, of what? Like,
Right.
you gotta get you gotta get some level beneath that. Like,
Yeah.
what, if you look at all the associates who come into your business, what's their average first year, second year, third year earnings? What's their average collections if you're
Yeah.
paying whatever it is, 30%? In addition to that, do you pay any healthcare benefits? Do you match any retirement? What's the
Yep.
opportunity to become a partner, an equity track buy-in or earn-in or
Yeah.
something like that? What's the total package look like? What's it
Right.
like to really work here? And
Yeah.
anybody that says, well, you know, you're paying 30% and they're paying 32%. If they can't get off the percentage, that will never go away.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
just as likely to lose them for a point here or there versus retaining them forever. And
Yeah.
and so I think that's the thing about clarity, is that you need to have that presentable in a
Mhm.
cogent argument type of a setting. And I think that's important to create clarity. If you can create that clarity in the mind of the associate, then they have more confidence in making the decision to join your team.
Yeah. And I think, gosh, even just around like reimbursing CE and tech stipends. And, I know groups that have like if the associate kind of manages that practice, is like the managing partner of that practice, there's like a certain stipend or percentage, and even at different levels. And so I don't know that I would probably encourage, like, my clients, like, you don't have to have answers for it all, but I think it's just the conversation of like, here's what ownership could look like, here's other things, here's what average doctors do with it. It gives them the confidence of, I'm being taken care of.
Yeah, I think dentists are still uh, entrepreneurially minded by and large, and predisposed to want to be owners of their business. That's different than the people who go to medical school who know they're going to be part of a hospital network or something
Yeah.
like that. But dentists still kind of, I believe, rightly or wrongly, that that they're still entrepreneurially minded. And I think if you're going to build a group and you don't have an ownership track,
Yeah.
like how do they become owners? Then you're just creating a revolving door. And as I mentioned before, that's bad. And so when we, one of the things when we heard early on this problem about attracting and retaining associates, and you just hear that refrain enough, then you look at like, well, okay, how's the industry been structured? Well, historically, it's somebody's got a business valued at $1 million. The associate takes on a $500,000 loan from ABC Bank, and buys in, and now they're 50-50 partners, and then they buy out the senior partner in 10 years or something like that.
Right.
And so that was it. And so DeWalker and I both come from corporate America backgrounds, and we had at those prior companies something called restricted stock units, and that's an
Yeah.
earned equity methodology that is commonplace in corporate America for high performers and management employees essentially, and you get to earn equity in the business through your performance without actually having to write a check for it.
Yeah.
And the only way you earn it is through performance. Well, the dirty little secret is if you perform, the vast likelihood is that you're performing profitable or increasing the profitability of the mothership, and the equity that you earn, while very valuable and rewarding and fulfilling, the increase in value you created for the parent company is much greater than whatever you earned on your own. And so it's truly the rising tide that lifts all boats. And
Yeah.
we built another one called Profits Interest Unit that functions similarly, but different context, different tool in the toolbox. But for a group practice owner that is trying to build a business, and the business isn't performing optimally yet, so they don't want somebody to buy in at a discount right now today, or they don't want to give up too much, in terms of sweat equity, so to speak.
Yeah.
These are earned equity methodologies that play out over about a 10-year period, or at least the way we model them out. And the nice thing for the associates is, the average dentist is entering the workforce with like $305,000 in student loan debt, and that's not even including personal debt. So
Right.
they don't want to go to a bank and take on a 7-figure loan to start their own business, or buy into a bigger one either. So the
Right.
earned equity methods work really well on both ends.
Yeah, you were talking about some of that at Mark's event, and honestly, I think anybody listening to this, like just the value you guys bring. I know it's like way more to what you do, but just even the value on this associate conversation, recruiting, onboarding, continued plan of growth, and plus just the ownership kind of track is well worth working with you guys. Like that just pays off in it's just exponential. So
Thank you for saying that. I mean, it is we call it partnership pathways, and I mean it's a unique model that we've built. I'm not aware of anybody else that's been able to
yeah.
reverse engineer it. I know how long it took us to figure that out, but it's a truly unique solution, but it's great in growing group practices. Not ideal for solo practice unless it's like a large footprint solo practice, but for growing groups, it's a really sound methodology that has a lot of traction. So we're pretty proud of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Before I let you go here, a couple things. You seem like a morning routine guy. Is that true? Like what's your kind of morning routine? Is it very systemized? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, so I am a morning person, and I probably go to bed around 9 o'clock every night. My wife and I have an 8-year-old daughter, and so I try to protect my time with her as best I can. And so I get up between 4:30 and 5 in the morning, and I'm a cyclist. I ride my bike a lot, and you know do some racing type stuff and ride with groups and all that kind of jazz. So it's also a function of being on the road. I'm a road cyclist, so it's a little bit safer, relatively speaking, to be on the road in the early morning hours versus 5 p.m. 5
Yeah.
a.m. is preferable to 5 p.m. And the other part of it is, even when I'm not riding, if it's a day off or something like that, I just enjoy the mornings. I'm
Yeah.
fresher. I love a good cup of coffee. I'm the moron that created a coffee podcast that doubles as a group dentist or a group dental practice podcast. But Mornings I'm just fresh. I'm better, and I also like being physically fit. And if I
Yeah.
get all that done before my wife and daughter wake up, then that means it's,
It's a
that
good
the hay's in the barn at that point, and I
Yeah.
can eat whatever I want. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so it's Friday. We're coming into the end of the week. What does your Friday night look like? Like, what are you eating? What are you drinking? How are you ending the week?
Yeah. So if you had asked me on almost any other Friday, I would tell you that probably Friday nights we tend to spend at home, my wife and I, and maybe some of our neighbors, having a couple of cocktails, or cooking some easy dinner, getting some easy takeout or something after a long hard work week, and then
Yeah.
probably a long bike ride in the early morning on Saturday. I'm actually in a cancer fundraiser this weekend
Okay.
that starts tonight at 7 p.m. It's a 24-hour cycling thing that we raise money for cancer survivorship, and this is the 22nd year of it. I think this is my 11th or 12th year doing it. And I'm ranked number 2 in overall fundraising, in the event's about
Nice.
1.1 million raised so far. So this is a super cool,
Whoa.
yeah. I mean, it's a big deal in Charlotte. It's about
Yeah.
1,300 riders riding around about a 3-mile loop. So it sort of looks like Mardi Gras on a bike, kind of. It's not a race. It's all about raising money for cancer, but the city really comes out for it. And it's a super cool event. So tonight, I'll be 7 p.m. is when they'll launch us all off. So I'll be over there in a couple of hours getting ready for it, and I'll probably ride back home after a couple of laps tonight, just like seeing some people on the loop and going to a couple of lawn parties and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
then I'll be up early to ride 100 miles in the morning to hopefully escape the heat. So, but
Nice.
it's super cool. It's one of those, it's a way to give back, I mean, there,
Yeah.
like we talked about before you open the show, there are a lot of people who have it a lot worse off than we do, and this is a cause I believe in, and I try to do my part. So
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. A couple, three quick things. Number
yeah.
one, the podcast. What's it called? Where can they find it?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, the podcast is called Group Practice Accelerator. Group
Yeah.
Practice Accelerator, and you can find it off of our website, which is PolarisHealthcarePartners.com. We looked for the longest URL that was
Yeah.
unclaimed, and I
Of
think we
course.
found it. So, but I can shoot that to you if you want to put it in the notes or anything like that.
Yeah.
But PolarisHealthcarePartners.com, and it's called Group Practice Accelerator. We
Yeah.
try to be very granular, very education oriented, subject matter expertise to a degree.
Yeah.
So it's thick, and we try to keep it 20 to 30 minutes. So try to make it digestible. So
Yeah.
hopefully your audience finds some value in it.
Okay. Number two, if they want to connect with you online, what's the best place?
Yeah, so my email address directly is Perrin, Perrin, at PolarisHealthcarePartners.com.
Cool.
And if you go on our website, there's a book a call link somewhere on there that ends up populating my calendar. So you can submit a question or a topic to discuss and book
Yeah.
a call with me directly if that's easier, or feel free to shoot me an email. And I correspond with prospective clients about a dozen times a week. So I'm
Yeah.
always checking that.
Good, good. And then third, I know you guys got this event coming up in Denver. You want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. And
Yeah.
I hope you're going to be able to attend it with us.
Yeah.
We can talk about that offline. So, Mark Costas's Dental Success Institute, we really love their philosophy and the way they work with clients, and they've referred clients to us and back and forth. So I think there are a lot of philosophical fits, for lack of a better term. And the presentation that you saw in Phoenix around associate equity and recruiting and everything was very well received. So Mark and I thought, hey, why don't we try to do a joint conference that will be open to the public, not just his network or our network, but it would be about that entrepreneurial dentist looking to build a group. So we're calling it Scaling from Clinician to CEO. So it's that entrepreneur trying to work themselves out of the chair and into a leadership role, and it'll be everything from legal structures, equity structures, debt structures, partnership structures like associate equity. We'll talk about growth strategy, buy or build. How do you do it? How should you not do it? We'll talk about some partnership issues that come to the fore. We'll also talk about debt structures and how the best way to use bank funding. And we'll hear from a couple of clients we've worked with on their personal journeys as well. So we're going to, and Mark himself is going to do things around culture, doctor development, systemization, and all that. There's a hell of a lot in about a day and 2/3. So it's October 5th through 7th in Denver at the newly renovated Sheraton, which I haven't stayed in a Sheraton in a while. They put about 80 million bucks in this thing, and it's unbelievable. So yeah, it looks really, really great. So arrive on Wednesday, registration, cocktails that night. The meat of the matter is Thursday all day and Friday to about 3 p.m., I think. And pool cocktail reception on Thursday evening. Registration is open. We'll give you the link to that if you don't mind broadcasting it out. But we certainly think it's going to be a great conference, and we're going to limit it to about 150 people. So we expect it to sell out. I think the likelihood is we'll do another one at some point, but we wanted to test out some things before we kind of went full throttle with it. So we're excited about it. I know Mark is too. So thank you for allowing me to talk about that.
Yeah, of course. And I, one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on, I know you guys had that coming up, but also, man, when you guys were talking about it, I was like, I want to go. Like, I want to attend just because it was all really valuable stuff. I was like, man, it helps me just in the space, to know some of that stuff as well. So, would highly advise that. But man,
I'll tell you. Well, if I can say one more thing, Josh, about it. You and I attend enough conferences that is like death by panel, death by PowerPoint. I say you see the same people in a different city in a different hotel every other weekend. And, that's okay for your first pass or two. But when Monday comes, what are you doing any different than before you went to the conference? Our whole goal in putting this together is at the end of every presentation, there are going to be 2 or 3 key takeaways. Some things you got to think about, some things you got to do when you get home, something to really drill down on. And we hope that when people leave that conference, they're going to be overwhelmed with the depth of knowledge that they got, but they're also going to have some actionable things that say, okay, if this is really what I want to do, I've got my list built of things to figure out. And if we do that, we will have accomplished the mission, and it'll be different than arguably any other conference that they've attended.
Yeah. I love it, man. Well, look, thanks so much for spending part of your Friday with me. I know Friday's like that day you're wrapping everything up at the end of the week. I like putting these in because it actually gives me something to look forward to. I'm like, oh, I get to talk with Perrin on Friday. Like, that makes a really good end to the week.
100% agree. I've been looking forward to this for a while, ever since we scheduled it, and doing these types of podcasts and interviews and things are fun for me. So they're always long work weeks, but this is a cherry on top for sure. I really appreciate you having us on today.
Yeah, man. So guys, check out Perrin and Polaris Healthcare Partners. Honestly, set up a call with him if you're interested. Jump into the podcast, especially those episodes on associateship. If that is something that's relevant to you, come out to the event. There's a lot of steps here before full blown, let's just work together. So engage on one of those, right? And just get to know these guys, especially if that's the space you're in, because I think there's so much value these guys are delivering. I've never seen them do anything but over deliver. So thanks, man. I appreciate your time.
Really my pleasure. I can't thank you enough for having me on today.
All right, guys. That's it for episode 40. We'll see you next time around.